What is up, everyone, and welcome to another Rust electrical tutorial. I'm Gneissish, and this is the second video in a series of videos aimed at players who are new to electricity or trying to hone their skills in electricity. If you didn't watch the first video, it was on power sources, so the generator, the solar panels, and the wind turbine. I suggest you watch that because that information will not be covered again in this video. We're talking about batteries today, and so let's just go ahead and get started. The crafting of the batteries is relatively simple. If you look up, batteries in your crafting menu with Q, you'll see that you have the small battery requires a level 1 workbench, which is and 5 high qual. The medium battery is 5 high qual, 1 tech trash, and a level 2. And the large battery is 10 high qual, 2 tech trash, and a level 2. So you can get all these done through the first two workbenches. You can also purchase the medium battery at Bandit Camp for 75 scrap. You can see at the bottom there. And so you can skip the tech tree stuff if you're looking for, you can buy the medium, which is 50 volts max. So that's a pretty good start. Otherwise, if you're starting with a small battery, which is what we're going to cover next, the first thing we're going to talk about here is that the charging efficiency. And so that's something that I think a lot of people get confused at when they first start, working with Rust batteries, is that the charging efficiency of the Rust batteries are 80%, which means for every volt you send there to charge it, it's only going to accept 0.80 volts of that to charge it. And so this means that you have to send more to the battery than its output. And the simple way to know that is this little equation I made here. So the battery output times 1 volt divided by 0.8 equals the minimum charge, or just simply the battery's output divided by 0.80 gives you the minimum charge. So the small battery, if you do 10 divided by 0.80, you get 12.5. We can't send 12.5, so that's 13. So as far as you're concerned in Rust, you need a minimum of 13 to keep the car battery charged. If you're using if you have 10 volts of stuff hooked up to it. So this has 10 watts, 10 Rust watts. So if you have it fully loaded, meaning it's sending out 10 volts, to power 10 volts worth of stuff, you're going to need 13. And so the best way to do this is to not think in terms of, well, I'm only using this much of the battery, and so I should send this much. Just if you set up a battery, send the minimum it needs, or more accurately, a little more, to keep it charged. So this one has a minimum charge of 13. That means 1 solar panel, which sends out 20 at its best, during the day. Right now it's close to noon, so we're going to get 20 out of this. All you would have to do here is run this straight to your battery, like so, and this is going to keep this battery charged no matter what. And so what you need is an average of 13. It's not, no power source except for the generator, actually, and a very well-placed windmill is going to give you an almost constant power source. And so, the solar panel is going to vary from 0 to 20, 20 to 0, from morning till noon, noon till night. And so the way the Rust day-night cycles work is that you have 45 minutes of day, 15 minutes of night if you're not on a modded server. And so that one solar panel, well placed, and again, watch the first video for how to place them, the direction to place them. Well placed, correctly placed, is going to keep this charge no problem. It's got 20 volts at its top, and that's way more than the 13 that you need. And so the average of this will be above 13, the 12.5 or 13 volts to keep this charged if you're using all 10 watts that are available in this. And so, that's pretty much it. The other thing I kind of want to start introducing into these, I touched upon it in the first video, is that you also want to think about, you need to know how to hook multiple sources together, and that's where the root combiner comes in. I talked about the tree nomenclature Rust uses. These are root power sources. This is a root combiner. It brings root sources into one or many into outputs, and I'll show you at the end there. And so if you wanted to do that, all you have to do there is add your other line, and I'll just follow the same path here, and we'll just jumper this way. And so if I bring this over here somewhere, drop this down, what I can do is I can hook this into any of the 2 root power inputs in the bottom. And I can take this one out and go back up here. And I also cover this in my video about wiring, the full base wire up video, which you can also check out if you want. And so you just run this like so. You run any of your root powers into your root combiner. There we go. So we have 2 solar panels into one. And the simple way to know how many root combiners you need is just count up how many power sources you have. In this case, we have 2. And so you need 1 less root combiner. So we have 2 of these, which means 1 of these. If I had 10 of these, it'd be 9 of these. So very simple to do. And then the output of that is just what you send to your battery. And so, you know, this is a beginner video. So there's other things you can do. You can actually like do a lot of interesting stuff before you get to the battery. But in general, you're just going to send this to a battery. Do you need 40 coming into this battery? Absolutely not. And so, you know, I guess a little teaser in what you could do is you could instead take this out to a branch switch, which will be covered in another video. And then you could take the branch out of that and you could run that to your battery. And you could say, okay, I want this to have at least, say, 16 volts to make sure it stays charged. And that means I got another 23 available for another battery, another small battery if you want. So you can run these straight to a battery. You could run them into a root combiner, send that into a splitter or a branch, and then set up like a literally whole nother battery somewhere if you wanted, and then run that out to this new battery. And there you go. So now we're sending 23, which is still too much, to this one, and we're sending 16 to that one. So you could say, well, make this 19, I guess. And there we go. Now we have 20 going to one, 19 going to the other, and you have 2 batteries that are independent. So you now have 10 available here, 10 available here, and that's it. And so as far as charging goes, that's kind of the easy way to do this. But of course, the absolute like easiest way to start is to simply just run charging directly in to your battery or into a root combiner if you're combining things. And there you go. Another quick thing about batteries that I want to touch upon is that there is, you know, people often would like to say hook 3 batteries, and we call this batteries in series, where you hook up the output of one to the input of another, the output of one to the input of another. And so the idea being, well, if this is 15 minutes, you know, if it has 150 rus-watt minutes, which it has, and you were to unhook it and it had 10 volts of stuff hooked up to it, it's going to run for 15 minutes before it dies. So the idea being, well, does this give you 45 minutes, 15, 15, and 15? It doesn't. And it's because of this. It's this 80% charging efficiency, this 0.80 volts for every volt it receives. This output here has 10 available, and it's going to send 10 to here. But this is only going to accept 8 of them for charging. And again, this battery requires 12.5 or 13 volts to stay charged if it has stuff hooked up to it. And so what'll end up happening is this battery will just, you know, it'll keep throwing it in here 8 out of 10, or well, send 10, but you know, 2 will be lost. This will accept 8 out of 10 until it dies. And then it'll start turning on for a second while this pops a couple of volts in, then it'll die again. It'll do that. So this, whatever's hooked to this will turn on and off until this battery dies, and then you're done. So this doesn't work. If you absolutely want to do this, you have to do what's called batteries in parallel. And because in order to charge the small battery with another small battery, you need to have the minimum charging requirement, which is 13. And so that just requires 2 batteries, which then requires you know, a root combiner after the battery, like so that you can hook them together to get the right voltage out. And so you hook up the outputs here. I think you see where this is going. This is absolutely ridiculous, and you don't need to do this. Now, if you really want to, please, by all means, you do you. But this is not something that is worth doing, because here, after I connect all this up, here we go. And all right, we've got this 10-volt battery in the front that has actually 45 minutes of backup that'll keep it going, because each one of these sends out 10 and 10, which means you have 20 coming out of here, which is more than the 13, and that's great. There you go. But now you need at least basically a solar panel for each one of these, 4 solar panels to keep all this charged. That's not worth it. Just go buy a medium battery and be done with it. So I don't recommend doing this unless you're so strapped that all you have are these small batteries and you need 45 minutes. But other than that, I'd say tech tree your way to what you need or buy it. So that is the small battery. We're going to move on now to the medium battery. This is exactly the same. Just kind of pointing this out. This medium battery has a 50-volt output, and so it has what? It can do up to 9,000 rus-watt minutes. So at 50 output, you'll end up, you know, you have to supply this again with 62.5, so basically 63 volts to keep this charged. And so again, 50 divided by 0.80 gives you this number, so 63. And so now you can start to see, well, now I have this medium battery, and this is the exact same information as this small battery, except that it requires more because it gives you more. So you need 63 minimum, which means that's a minimum of 4 solar panels, because each solar panel can only put out 20 at its best. And so in order for you to keep this charged with solar panels, and notice I'm not including the wind turbine on these batteries, because if you hooked up a wind turbine onto either of these batteries, yeah, it's definitely going to keep it charged. Maybe a waste of a wind turbine though. So in order to keep this going, you would have to combine 4 solar panels, because 20, 40, 60, 80, because 3 is 20, 40, 60, but we need 63. So 20, 40, 60, 80 volts at their best. And what we're going to do is I'm going to, remember the way to do this is count up your power sources, your root power sources, and then subtract it by 1. And that's how many root combiners you need. So we have 4 solar panels, so 4 minus 1 is 3. So we need 3 root combiners. So I'm just going to set these root combiners in a row here. Something to really point out and understand: never put these on your roof. I see that sometimes. They're easy to destroy. If you put these on your roof and they get destroyed, they disconnect your root power sources from your batteries. So don't put these outside, put these inside, and preferably put all this in your TC room. Watch my full base wire up to see an example of a fully wired TC room. And so all you do here is same thing. I guess we could do green this time. Is you go to each solar panel, and you're just going to run that solar panel to one of the inputs on your thing. I'm just going to do this live just so that we can always run from this side, I guess. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start selecting panels, and I'm going to grab this one, and I'll just go back the other way. Sorry if this is just a little messy. I don't want to take too long doing this, so I'm just going to run this over to the input on another one, which is right here. There we go. And then we've got these ones. I'll just take this one back here. So the point is, all you're going to do is take each of your outputs on your solar, and you're going to put that into any available input on the root combiner. It doesn't matter which one you pick. I'm just arbitrarily picking these, and that one clipped through a little bit. I'm arbitrarily picking these, and I'm just going to connect this into here. There you go. So now all I've done is each one of those solar panels is running to each one of these inputs, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then to combine these, this is why you always need one less than the amount of root inputs. And I'll use something like yellow so that it's obvious. And so then you just run those to any available input on the other root combiner or combiners, which you'll see in the future. So there you go. And so after you hook up your inputs, you just then take the outputs of the root combiners and you send them to any available input on a different root combiner. So not itself, obviously. So here we have now the combined output of this root combiner, and that's 80 volts there. And so I can just take that out and run that to the input, charging input, which over here is right there. And I can just jumper that up, and there you go. That's it. And so this medium battery now has at least 63 volts going to it. And remember, it just has to be on average. So if these are placed correctly, that's enough. There's reasons why, because solar or basically root inputs are often average because they fluctuate. You have to consider that. So you don't want to send exactly 63 or exactly 13, or in a case over here, exactly 125, because as long as the average of your inputs is that number, then fine. But you just have to verify that that's actually true. So that is the medium battery. Again, very simple, no different than the small battery, just a little more. You get 50 volts instead of 10, but you have to give it more juice, 63 instead of 13. So the large battery, this is the last one. This, nothing's changed. It's still the same equation, only we have 100 volts divided by 0.8 gives you 125. So that's the minimum. The minimum you need is 125. And, you know, so again, with solar panels, just real quick, I have all these hooked up. I'll walk you through this just because this would have taken too long. But if you think about it, if it's 125, each solar panel requires 20, can put out 20 volts at its best. Then you're talking about 7 solar panels, because 6 solar panels is not enough. 7 solar panels gives you 140, which is actually a pretty good number. I tend to do 160 just to guarantee I don't, you know, depending on how things are set up. But that would be 7 of these. And so if you did 7, it would be 6 root combiners. I went ahead and hooked up 9 of these just because I thought it was a good exercise to see how that was done. So, you know, again, large battery, same idea, except 100 volts, 125 minimum for charge, based on that 80% charging efficiency. You can now pick up batteries in Rust, and they will keep their charge. So if you pick this up, it's currently at 200, it's default when you set it, and you place it down somewhere else, it's going to take damage, but it retains that 200. So that's kind of a tip. If you are charging batteries for something that you have to set up, you can charge it elsewhere and move it, or you can move it within your base without losing its charge. So that's kind of cool. So real quick, let's just look at how, you know, we talked about the solar panels over there. I think this is a good example to see how, you know, this is what it would look like in your TC room or your electrical room. And so if you come up here and look, basically I just did it by color coding. I've got 9 solar panels. These 3 are red, these 3 are green, and these 3 are blue. And those lines are just running. So the red lines are running out to these first 2 here. And, you know, they're just using these 3. And I skipped this one here, just kind of a pro wiring tip if you want this to look cool, because you have to connect these together, right? So that's here we have these 3 running to 2, because right, 3 and 2. These 3 are running to, the green ones are running to these 2, and the blue ones are running to these 2. You can see where they're hooked in here. And the black lines are just the ones that connect the 2 together. And then the yellow lines are connecting, you know, I have 9 up there, which means I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of these root combiners. And so even if this seems confusing, all I did was run the solar panels into available slots, and then I connected the output of the combined output to any available input on any other one. I did it in this way because it looks cool, but you could have been chaotic with this, and you'll still always end up with one input in the end, as long as you run everything into an input down here, connect the output to any other available input on a different root combiner until you run out of space, and you'll end up with just one output. That's just how it'll work. So it's not a super complicated thing unless you just want it to look this way. I thought about it and planned it out, but that's not necessary. So here we have a single output at 180 because it's high noon, and these are getting full sunlight facing the right direction. And so there you go, 180. And so that's definitely enough. You know, 180 is screaming for the large battery. And maybe you want that. I mean, sometimes depending on where you're placed or whatever, you might have shade that hits your base earlier because of a cliff. You might need that 180 to compensate for a quicker loss of solar. So everything is going to be very spot dependent. If you're just out in the field, out in the open, then you could get away with 160. You don't need a whole 180. But again, that's up to you. So now for the other way to do the large battery is the wind turbine. And the wind turbine, you know, whereas you can pick up solar panels and you can replace them and repair them. Actually, another point to make sure you understand is that solar panels take damage, and when they're damaged, they put out less volts, so fix them. You can't pick up the wind turbine. And so wherever you place it is where you place it. And watch the first video for placement tips. But it has a single output, and it varies. The wind varies in the game based on location and height of installation. And so right now we're putting out 142. That is enough. You know, we need 125. That's enough. And so as long as this is placed right, one wind turbine can maintain a fully loaded, 100 max output. You've got 100 stuff hooked up to it. You can do that. If I were to say run this, let's do it in red, I guess. If I were to run power out of here, and I were to run that over to this battery, and there we go. Pop it up over here. Okay, so if I were to hook this up to this battery, that's going to send that full volts over there, or the 100 or the 180, assuming that the sunlight there. This is better. Assuming the sunlight stays up, and so we've got what 180, and so this is taking it. It's going to charge really quickly because there's nothing hooked up to it. So you can see that that capacity is flying up. And so if I were to use a branch, I'm going to put a branch here just to simulate a base. And so that's not a branch. Whoops. If I were to put a branch here, like so, and hook this to it, this simulates a base. I can set this branch out to, I'm just going to set out to 100. And so what this is doing is telling the battery, well, I've got 100 usage. And you'll notice now that its charging rate is now much slower than when it didn't have stuff hooked to it. And this is why you have to consider this minimum charging voltage. So I have currently 180 going to it, and so it's charging even though it's using 100 volts. And so what'll happen is once this reaches 24,000 rust watt minutes or rust watts, it will run for 4 hours, right? So that's why they scale up as they go. And so this one will run for 4 hours if it loses and it's fully loaded. So that's based on 100. You'll notice there that the battery says, charge left is in minutes and seconds. The active usage is what you have hooked to it. So if you have 100 volts of stuff like this is simulating here, it's going to say 100 active usage, meaning that's how much stuff is connected to this in Rust. And unlike real life, Rust batteries don't. If there are more advanced circuits that get around this, but we're not going to talk about that right now. If you have things hooked to it, whether they are on or off doesn't matter. If I have say a string of lights somewhere after this and there were 30 volts and I turn those lights off, it doesn't matter. It's still, the battery still says, well, I know that I had this many lights, so I'm just going to drain. It's not like real life, it's a game, right? So you have to adapt to, you can't save electricity, again, there's certain ways to do this, but in general, assume that if you have 100 volts of stuff hooked up, whether they're running or not is irrelevant. They're still pulling on the battery. So that's pretty much all you need to know for that. You can, if I wanted to, I could unhook this here, and you'll notice if I unhook it, so now I have no charge, and now you'll notice that now I'm counting down 3 minutes, 24 seconds, because I only have 336-ish rust watts going in there, so my loss is quickly approaching. So if I were to hook up this output on our wind turbine here, and then jumper that down to the bottom here and into the input like that. So now that input is going to, should stop it. Let's see where it's at. It's at 116. So actually, no, that's not enough. You need 125 minimum. So if you watch this, you'll see that it's slowly going down. We have 116 coming in, and it's still dying because this has a full draw on this. And so this is a perfect example, actually, of things vary. The wind is slowing down. This thing is putting out less, and this is starting to drain, which is why another thing you can do, you can think of, if we were to add this, we have 9 here. If you were to include this, 10, all you'd have to do is add another root combiner, because we've just added a root power source. So instead of 8, we would need 9 because we'd have 10 if you include all these together. And so to do that, you would simply, maybe I can just put it over here. It doesn't really matter. But if I were to unhook this and I were to rerun this, I would run this to the root combiner itself instead of the battery. So you can kind of see where this is going. Let's see if I run this here. We'll just jumper this over here. Okay, and then up to here. And then the output of this one here is going to run to the other input on that root combiner right here. So now we've connected all these together, and we have this combined output, which is now running considerably more. So we have 296 now because we've added all this solar and that. That's a wild amount of electricity. And at this point, that's when you would want to do something, a little more clever and run the output of that maybe to a branch instead, like this. And then you could say, well, of all that intense amount of volts I have, I'm going to go ahead and send out 160 to this battery so that we can keep that thing going. And so if I just jumper this down, over, and into the battery, now what's going to happen is I've partitioned off 160, and I've still got right there 137. So this is a way, and in the next video, we're going to be talking about power distribution. Like, what do you do once you've done this, once you've combined your root power sources into your batteries, and you're ready to go, what do you do with it? And so that's going to be the next video. So this video, and we're going to talk much more about things like power distribution using branches like I just did, and what to do. You can create these huge factories of power generation, and then you can you can create very specific paths to take things out. And so the very last thing that we're going to talk about real quick is I'm going to also point out that, you know, like I did batteries in series where I did all that crazy stuff with a small battery, we'll do this over here. If you have 2 batteries, another misconception is that you can take 2 batteries, say 2 large batteries, and you're like, well, hey, if I take 2 large batteries and I hook them up, the outputs of those each to one of these, like so. There you go. Now I've got 200 available. That's true. You do now have 200 available, but one problem is, and we'll use a branch to simulate, let's say, you know, a turret requires 10 volts. So let's say I hook this up to here and I set this branch out to 10 as if it's going to a turret. You'll notice that it starts to draw on this right away. Look at the active usage, it says 11 because it includes the switch itself. It requires 1. Notice that they each say 11. And so each of these batteries is saying, you know, this one's saying, hey, I'm powering that switch and that turret. And the other battery is like, hey, I'm also charging, using that, I'm powering that switch and that turret. They're both under active usage, even though that doesn't make sense. This would technically be 22 volts for one thing that's 10 volts and a switch. So that doesn't make sense. It's a trade-off. You get 200 volts to play with. So I've still got 189 here, but each of these is still going to require 125 plus volts to charge. And then they're all connected into this 200 volt circuit, but they're also going to, you know, register active usage. And as long as you keep them charged, you can keep them from dying. But really, the smarter way to do this is to just not do this and to just have 2 separate circuits, which is safer anyway. If someone destroys, you know, have 100 of that 200 you want going to some stuff, and have 100 of that original 200 going to other stuff. Which means if someone destroys this battery rating you, the stuff hooked to this battery doesn't get shut off, right? Because as soon as you hook up 200 volts of stuff, if you lose half of it, you know, depending on where things are in the circuit line, they're going to turn off because now they only have 100 coming to them. So this is not a good idea. The idea is to have a power source or a farming of power sources like we've done here, where you then, you know, branch stuff out into other batteries such that each battery runs its own stuff. So like you could have a, you know, battery for turrets, you could have a battery for your farm, you could have a battery for lights and pumps and whatever, doors and whatever you want. So that's a much smarter way to do this. So again, this is just sort of a beginner's touch onto batteries, how to charge them. The biggest takeaway here is the minimum charging voltage requirement. And then just don't do things in series, don't do things in parallel, run separate circuits, and know that you can pick up the batteries and they'll retain their charge. You can rotate them with R when you go to place them like this, and so you can place them however you want. And that's all I got, folks. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them below. Otherwise, you can get me on my Discord. See you later.